Hey guys, Will here. So today we're going to be checking out the new Cube Controls Mercedes-AMG GT Edition sim racing wheel. Now this is quite an interesting wheel. Obviously, as you can see, it's been designed in collaboration with Mercedes-AMG, but unlike what we saw with the Fanatec M4 GT3 wheel that we looked at just recently, which is in fact the actual wheel that you'll find in the real life car, this is a little bit different. This is designed around what you would find in the real car, but still with a sim racing focus, which means you're not missing out on any of those features that might be important to sim racers and not making way for features that you just don't need in a sim racing context. And because of that, I think you might also be surprised at the price point of this wheel, considering that it is designed in collaboration with a real life car company. It isn't cheap, but it's certainly not as expensive as some of the other wheels that we've checked out recently here on the channel. So let's dive in today and see what this thing is all about and whether it might be the right wheel for your sim rig. Let's get started. So to kick off here, firstly today, a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Micro Center. Now, if you're in the US, you're probably already familiar with Micro Center as a really fantastic place to browse for all sorts of electronic equipment, from PCs all the way through to gadgets and electronics. Pretty much anything you want, you'll find there. What you might not be aware of though is that they also carry a variety of sim racing products, which is growing all the time. And this is really exciting for sim racers because it means that you finally have the opportunity in many cases to get eyes on, or even sometimes hands on, with a lot of the sim racing gear that we review here on the channel before you actually make the decision to purchase it. They've got a couple of specials going on at the moment as well, including $25 off your purchase of $100 or more if you register via the link down in the description below. They've got a new configurator as well. You can actually design your own sim rig. They've also got a new store opening in early 2024 in Charlotte, which is very, very exciting. So check them out via the links down in the description below, or visit your local Micro Center today. And a big thank you once again to them for sponsoring today's video. Now, also quickly before we dig into this wheel, need to say a big thank you to Cube Controls for sending across this sample for us to check out for today's video. We will be cross comparing it against a few other wheels in today's video as always, so it's important that you're aware that all of those wheels have been sent to us under the exact same conditions. Now, this particular wheel hasn't quite been released to the public, at least at the time that we're making this video, but we will put some affiliate links to some of our affiliate partners down in the description below. So if you do decide you want to pick up one of these wheels, once those partners have stock, you'll be able to do that. And that's an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you if you find what we do here of benefit and you want to help support our work so we can keep making videos. And likewise with any of the other wheels that we'll be discussing today, you'll find links for those as well if you want to help support us. And also make sure you check out boostedmedia.net for our full reviews of all the other wheels that we'll be cross comparing to in today's video. But as is always the case here, no third party has any sort of external control over anything we're saying. Everything I'm going to be sharing today is purely just my own observations and my own opinions, and Cube Controls and Mercedes obviously don't get to see the video before you guys do. So I think that covers everything you need to know as context for today's video. Let's dive in now and take a look at this new wheel, starting off with pricing. So as I mentioned earlier, at the time that we're recording this, the wheel hasn't actually been released for purchase just yet, but the pricing information that they've given me is €705, and then VAT or other relevant taxes are going to be on top of that, and obviously shipping as well. So that puts it at a pretty aggressive price point, I think, at least for what we have here in terms of hardware quality. So if you compare that to something like the F Core, which I was a really big fan of in terms of value for money, and I've kind of been steering people a little bit in the direction of this wheel recently with some of the more expensive wheels that we've been reviewing here, simply because of the value for money that this represents in terms of the features that I think are most important for sim racing. Gets you up and running with something that's really nice and rigid at a very aggressive price point. So this guy comes in at €469, again, not including taxes and shipping. And then if you step up to something like the F Pro wheel from Cube Controls, and again, we've got full reviews of both of these other wheels on the channel if you want to check them out. This guy, very similar feature set overall. There's a few additional buttons and bits and pieces that you can do on this, which we'll get into in just a minute. This guy comes in at €860. So somewhere in between the two of them. Now, there are a few features which are going to be important to some people, which have been unfortunately not included on this particular wheel, which does obviously help them keep the price point down. But the aim here, I think at least, has been to sort of provide a bit of a step up from something like the F Core wheel, but without an absolutely massive price tag attached to it. Now, of course, the flip side to that is that it will be appealing to a relatively limited market. If you're anything like me, you're probably not going to want to drive a Ferrari or a Porsche or something like that with a wheel that's got a Mercedes logo on it. So they are somewhat limiting their market. And it's a little bit of an interesting discussion here, I think, around, whether you guys appreciate these collaborations that we're seeing now with real life manufacturers, or whether you prefer a more generic style wheel. I mean, there's no reason why Cube Controls couldn't have developed something like this themselves. They don't necessarily need the input from these real life manufacturers to create something like this. It's more of a branding exercise, I think, at least. That's my opinion on it anyway. So it'd be really interesting to hear in the comments down below what you guys think. Would you consider buying a wheel like this given the fact that it has this branding on it, or would you, not even consider it because of that reason? So yeah, let us know in the comments down below what you guys think. But look, in terms of the other key features that you need to be aware of straight out of the box here, one of the things which I think is also going to be a big polarizer for people is that this is a 320 millimeter diameter wheel, which for me is a little bit on the large side. Now, the argument, of course, is that it is exactly the same diameter as you'll find in the real life AMG GT2 and GT track spec cars. So, I mean, if it's good enough for real life, then it's good enough for sim racing, right? But look, for me, I do find it a little bit clumsy to drive with. And I know that was something that quite a few people complained about with the Gomez Formula Pro Elite wheel that we looked at not all that long ago here on the channel. I believe that came in at 310 millimeter diameter. So this is even a little bit bigger than that. So what you need to be aware of in terms of the impact that that has on the driving experience is the larger the diameter, the more of a damping effect it has on the force feedback overall. So it just gives you a little bit more leverage, which makes you feel granular details a little bit less vividly. Now, it's not an issue on more powerful wheelbases. I would say anything over sort of 12 Newton meters, you're probably not going to struggle with it. You might just want to turn the force feedback up a little bit. But if you're looking at buying something like this for, say, use on a, a 5 Newton meter wheelbase, something like a CSL DD maybe, or up to, say, through a Mazda R9, then it may be something that you want to consider. The smaller the diameter, the more detail you're going to feel generally, but it does reach a point where it starts to get a little bit too twitchy for me as well. Again, depending on the style of car you're driving. And that's why I generally find somewhere between 280 and 300 is about right for me. It is a subjective thing. I find, for example, that the 270 millimeter Formula wheels that we get from Fanatec, for example, are a little bit too much on the twitchy side. They just feel a little bit awkward to drive with for me. So at the end of the day, it just boils down to what you personally prefer, but just be aware it is on the larger side, and that will have an impact on what it's like to drive with compared to some of the other Formula style wheels like this one that you might be used to using. Now, related to that as well, the other thing which will have an impact on the driving experience is, of course, the weight of the wheel. Now, this guy weighs in at just a touch over 1,300 grams, which is quite a bit lighter than some of the really super high-end wheels that we've reviewed here. It's certainly not the lightest wheel that we've tested either, but it is relatively well weighted. Given the larger diameter of the wheel as well, it does actually make it feel a little bit less hefty in your hands, but it is very nicely weighted. It feels nice and solid and purposeful in your hands, and it does return to center very nicely on the rig as well, so it doesn't feel awkwardly weighted or anything like that. So a really nice, solid and hefty feeling wheel in your hands without being excessively heavy, I would say, is probably the best way to describe it. Now, in terms of materials, while we're talking about weight, a couple of things that you might notice here. So we've got a beautiful brushed aluminium faceplate here with this carbon fiber inlay, which is genuine carbon fiber as far as I can tell at least. We've got a nice metal Mercedes logo there as well, which does appear to be genuine. It's certainly not, say, a little plastic emblem or anything like that. It's definitely cold to touch. So that's a nice little inclusion there too. We do still have the plastic shrouds around some of the buttons that we find on a lot of other Cube Controls wheels. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of those generally speaking. I just find that they give a lot of their wheels a more toy-like appearance overall, although I've got to admit with this particular wheel, I don't think that it's too over the top. It is quite a clean look overall, and it does provide that little bit of separation. So if you're driving in VR, for example, you can feel where the buttons are by touch rather than having to take the goggles off to see where they are, which obviously isn't something you're going to want to do when you're driving. We've got a cast aluminium rear housing on this. It is still anodized, but cast aluminium as opposed to CNC machine, which does keep the cost down a little bit, but certainly doesn't have any sort of impact in terms of rigidity whatsoever. The wheel feels absolutely solid, and you'll see that a little later on when we jump up on the rig. And then flipping back around to the front again, we do have nice anodized aluminium touch points for all of our rotary encoders and our 7-way multi-position switches here. The only plastic touch points that we have on the wheel are just the button faces, and then we have carbon fiber paddles on the back, which we'll be looking at in just a moment. So nice high quality touch points throughout here. And when you consider the price point of this wheel, I think that's something that is very impressive. Another thing that's really impressed me here too is the material that they're using here for the hand grip. So it is that silicone kind of rubber material that has a nice amount of squish to it. Now, you've heard me complain quite regularly here on the channel that I'm not a fan of a lot of silicone grips because they tend to pick up dirt and debris, dead skin cells, things like that. If we talk about the F Core here, for example, you can see this is a little bit more tacky overall. It has a kind of sticky feeling to it, which feels quite gross driving with bare hands, and it does have a tendency to pick up dead skin cells and dirt and debris off your hands quite a bit. If we compare that to the F Pro, one of the things that I really liked about this wheel is it still has relatively good amount of squish to the material, but this has got a kind of shiny surface on it, which you can see here just on the camera yourselves, doesn't have that same tendency to be a magnet for dirt and debris like what we see on that more sticky material. Now, what we see here on this AMG wheel is something that's somewhat in between the two. It's the same kind of material as we saw on the Leux wheel that we reviewed a couple of months here on the channel, which I was a huge fan of. So it still has a nice grippy feel to it, but it's got a very slight texture on it. And what I find at least is that that kind of really stops it from picking up a lot of the dirt and debris that we've seen on a lot of those other wheels. It also gets rid of that sticky, kind of tacky feeling as well. So this is definitely, for me at least, and it is a very subjective thing, my favorite grip material that I've come across on any wheel, equal with that Leux wheel that we talked about previously. So if that is something that has put you off other wheels with silicone grips, I would say probably not a major concern here. It is still going to pick up a little bit of dirt and debris over time, but certainly not to the same extent as that sticky material that we see on some other wheels. So we'll skip over ergonomics for the moment and we'll save that for when we're over on the rig in just a minute. Let's talk now about the inputs and outputs available on this particular wheel. Now, I touched on the buttons before, so we'll quickly talk about those first. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buttons on either side. Now, these have a really nice feeling to them. So they've got a little bit of squish there. One of the things that I've always been subjectively not a huge fan of with Cube Controls wheels is they are quite snappy. They don't have a lot of squish to them before you press down on them. But these ones, you can see, have a really nice spring-loaded kind of cushioned effect to them before they actually snap. And then they've got a really nice, you can hear there on the microphone, a really nice intentional click to them. So subjectively a really nice feel, but objectively a really high quality feel to them, I would say. They don't echo throughout the wheel. They don't have that rattle or, you know, any sort of hint that they're not a very high quality switch. So yeah, definitely right up there with the best, if not the best feeling switches that I've ever felt on any sim racing wheel. And we've tested an awful lot here. So that is very high praise for this particular wheel, again, considering the price point that we have here. So those, as I said before, are the only plastic touch points. We do also have a selection of stickers included inside the package as well, which are the standard Cube Control stickers that you'll find in any of their wheels. Not the highest quality stickers that we've come across from any wheel. I'd say that award probably goes to Grid Engineering at this point in time, but they are a nice shiny surface. We have found on some Cube Controls wheels in the past that the stickers do tend to move around a little bit over time with driving. So that is something that I will keep an eye on with this wheel. But you can notice here as well with these push buttons, they do have a slight little recess that kind of locates the sticker in the middle. And that should hopefully maybe mitigate the stickers moving around like they do on the curved faces that we see on some of their other wheels. So yeah, no complaints at all when it comes to stickers on the buttons themselves. You will notice, however, and this has been a complaint on the F Pro wheel as well that I've seen from a few people, the stickers on these don't fit absolutely perfectly. And because it is a backlit illuminated little area here, you will notice a little bit of an uneven glow around the outside of the sticker, which is unfortunate. Not a major thing by any means, but again, comparing across to say Grid Engineering, for example, that is a step up when it comes to sticker quality overall. All the other buttons that we have on here, with the exception of the carbon fiber paddles, are all anodized aluminium. You can see a nice red theme going on through here. So we've got our 2 anodized hat switches for our 7-way switches. So these have up, down, left, right, rotary encoder, and push button functionality. Do really like the fact that they're including 2 7-way switches. That means that you can assign one to navigating through your black box inside the sim, for example, and one of them through to your menu. We do see that on a lot of wheels, particularly from Cube Controls, and that is something that we do also see featured on the F Core wheel, for example, too, which does come in at that cheaper price point. So it's not necessarily a reason to go for this wheel over other ones, but nonetheless something that I do like to see. And then the rotary encoders on the face of the wheel don't have push button functionality, but they do have a nice positive snap in each position. Same feeling as what we have on the F Pro, if you're familiar with that wheel. So a good positive click, no mistaking whether or not you've turned the dial, but not overly stiff either. So nice and comfortable to operate with or without gloves. And then we've got 2 thumb encoders inlaid here as well, which are nice and easy to reach with your hands. We'll see that later on when we go for a drive. A good amount of resistance there as well. And again, exactly the same amount of resistance as we have with the F Pro. So quite a bit of resistance there. Some people may find that they're a little bit too stiff for their liking, particularly given that you can't actually access these from the back side here. So you do have to rely on just kind of pushing on the face of it. Some stiffer buttons I've complained about in the past, and what you can do in those cases is you can kind of get in behind it and turn it with both hands like that. Whereas with these, because they're only exposed in the one face, it does make them a little bit on the stiff side maybe, but again, it's gonna be a pretty subjective thing, I think. If I had my way, I'd probably have just a little bit less resistance there. So let's flip the wheel around now to the back and talk about the shifters, and then we'll talk about the outputs on this wheel. So we've only got an upshift and a downshift on this particular wheel, no provision whatsoever for analog paddles, which will be a deal breaker for a lot of people. Given the style of car that this is primarily designed for driving, a lot of people might be perfectly happy with not having a clutch at all, but for me, I think at this kind of price point, there's not really any reason to not have those on here, particularly when you consider that those are an option for the F Core wheel, which at a baseline is cheaper than what this wheel is. And they are of course included on the F Pro wheel. Now, in terms of the quality of the shifters themselves, I do have a few concerns here. One of the things that I noticed immediately is that the upshift paddle does feel a little bit different from the downshift paddle. Almost feels like there's a little bit more magnetic resistance. These are magnetic shifters. You can see the little neodymium magnet in the back here. They are using Hall effect sensors as well, which means that there's no parts to wear out over time, which is a good thing. But I have had a few issues with the downshift paddle being a little bit sticky. You can see there it's doing it right now. When it warms up, when you've been driving with it a bit, it does seem to loosen up a bit, and that's not quite such an issue. But yeah, sticky paddle on that. And you'll also notice here in the back, the power button was also missing on my particular sample. Now, I noticed that that was also the case with Dan Suzuki's one as well. After I'd done my initial testing, I did go and watch his video, and yeah, just noticed that that was missing on his wheel too. So that may just be something that's related to early production, but why a company would send something to a reviewer that has that problem is beyond me. I just don't see how something like that could ever pass quality control and be sent out to a reviewer. So yeah, that is definitely something that does raise concern, and it's not something that I can just loosen off either because of the design of these with pins that actually are inserted rather than screws that we could back off. But in terms of adjustment, you can see there are some holes there which allow you to move the paddles in and out. The default position is absolutely fine for me. No other adjustments available here, so we can't adjust the angle or anything like that like what we have with some other Cube Controls wheels. If we compare across to the F Core, you can see a very similar design in the cages. However, these are some sort of a composite plastic material, whereas we have cast aluminium anodized on this particular wheel. These ones are a little bit quieter on the F Core, if that's something that's important to you. They have a plasticky kind of sound to them by comparison, but yeah, definitely louder on the AMG wheel if that's something that's important to you. So just bear that in mind as well. And if you compare across to what you have on the F Pro wheel, you can see these are quite a different design. We've got carbon fiber and anodized aluminium cages there. These are their R-spec shifters, and these have a little bit more adjustment available too, so you can actually adjust the throw as well as the adjustment angle here too, so you can move them in and out. And again, check out our full review of that wheel for all the details on that. But you can see these do have little ball bearing carriers which allow them to pivot a little bit more freely, whereas on this particular wheel it does appear to just be kind of pivoting on a metal pin rather than any sort of ball bearing, which probably is contributing to that binding up a little bit. So yeah, I'll work on that over time and see if I can loosen it up a little bit. But yeah, that sticking is definitely something that concerns me to see on something that's sent out to a reviewer, but hopefully not something that we see on the wheels that you guys end up with in your hands. But again, let us know in the comments if you do run into any issues there. And look, that is pretty much it in terms of inputs. Let's flip around back to the front again and quickly talk about outputs. So all of these white buttons that you see on the face of the wheel are all LED backlight. That is RGB LED, which is controllable through their own software as well as through SimHub. We'll explore that a little bit later on over on the rig. We also have some backlit indicators for our thumb encoder and our rotary encoders, as well as 4 flag LEDs, 2 on either side here too, which can be configured to be used as rev lights as well through SimHub if you wish to do so. Those of you who are familiar with SimHub would know that your imagination is pretty much the limit when it comes to what you can do in SimHub. So, you know, we'll explore that in a little bit of detail later on, but I'm not going to turn it into a full tutorial on how to use SimHub. There are plenty of videos if you want to dig into that in more detail. So just lastly, a couple of other quick things to mention here. The red hub adapter that you see here is an optional accessory. I don't have a price for that at this particular point in time, but just important that you're aware that it will be an additional cost. You will notice internally there as well, there is a little pin assembly if you do want to use their own integrated quick release, which has the wiring pass through the quick release itself. That's unfortunately something that we haven't had the opportunity to test here yet, but I am definitely keen to check out when we get the opportunity. So we've got a 70mm stud pattern here, as well as a 50.8mm for mounting to various different quick releases. And I do like what they've done here with alternate threaded and non-threaded holes. That means that it's going to be compatible with the vast majority of quick releases that are available there on the market. And they do, of course, include a set of tweezers for installing stickers, as well as a selection of little tools and nuts and bolts and bits and pieces for mounting this up to your particular quick release, which means that you're not going to need any additional tools to get this mounted up, which is a nice touch. You can see here on the back as well the little Bluetooth antenna. So this does have the ability to connect to your PC via the QCon connection, which we'll talk about in just a minute, as well as Bluetooth. It's not using any sort of proprietary Bluetooth protocol, so your PC will actually need to have inbuilt Bluetooth to be compatible with the wheel, but that does allow you to operate the wheel wirelessly. And you might even be able to notice through the back there, you can actually see the battery. So this thing has up to 50 to 60 hours of battery life if you don't have any of the LEDs enabled. If you do have the LEDs at full brightness, they tell me it should be around about 10 hours of usage. You're looking at 2 to 4 hours to charge the battery up. There is a little indicator light on the front as well to let you know when that battery is getting low. You've still got quite a number of hours of usage to go in that scenario, so you're unlikely to be caught out in the middle of driving. And they do use the really nice QCon adapter, which we've been using now for a couple of years and had absolutely no issues with whatsoever. There are a few concerns early on that the strength of the magnet might not be quite strong enough and that it might become disconnected while driving. I can tell you that I've driven with the F Pro wheel specifically for probably a good 50 or 60 hours now over the course of the last year, if not more than that, and I've never once had an issue, even when the wheel's gone absolutely crazy on me and I've got the cable stuck between my legs and things like that. Unless you're in a situation where it's actually going to damage the cable, it's never ever come disconnected unintentionally. So the way this works is literally it just drops onto the connection like that. You can see it's got 4 little floating pogo pins internally on the connector side and 4 little contact pads on the wheel side. So that plugs in like so. Very easy to do, and that provides both battery charging capacity for the wheel as well as the USB connection if you don't want to use it wirelessly. So yeah, absolutely no complaints with that whatsoever. As I said, I did have a few concerns early on, but none of those have proven to be an issue whatsoever. It's been an absolutely flawless design that I've found to be extremely reliable. So I think that covers everything that we need to here on the desk. So let's get the wheel over onto the rig now and talk quickly about the software side of things and of course get into the driving experience. While I'm doing that, I would really appreciate from you guys, if you found this video helpful so far, please do jump down, hit the thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Only about 30% of the people that watch these videos are in fact subscribed to the channel, and I know these days it doesn't make a big difference to what you actually see in your newsfeed, but where it does have a big impact is telling YouTube that this kind of content is valuable, so it sends it out and shows it to other sim racers. So if you find the content valuable, I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind doing me that little favor. But let's jump over now onto the sim rig. Okay, so up on the rig now, we've got this connected to my SimuCube 2 Ultimate base via the HRS Zero Play quick release. Same quick release and mechanism that we've been using for many years here now, so it gives us a good point of reference for doing a couple of flex tests, which we're going to do first here. So I can tell you straight away, I'm not noticing any noticeable. There's a little bit of up and down movement if I pull down on the wheel. That's just the base moving a tiny little bit on the mounts here, but I'm not seeing any relative movement in the quick release or the little hub adapter itself, and no discernible twist. Often what I always test for is that there's no twist in the wheel, so I like to push with my palms on the bottom, particularly for these Formula style and GT3, GT2, GT4 style wheels. Always check that there's no flex in this piece here, but no, nothing that I'm noticing at all. So I'd say absolutely fine in terms of rigidity, right up there with the best of the best, which I expected from this design, but good to validate that anyway. So let's jump into software now, starting with the Cube Controls CubeSet software. Now remember earlier I said that you can connect the wheel via Bluetooth or via your USB connection directly. We've actually got it connected via USB right now. Did test it out via Bluetooth, absolutely no issues whatsoever. I haven't had any issues with Bluetooth on any of the other wheels that we've tested here. That obviously will depend on where you've got your antenna and whatnot. So we can't, guarantee that it's going to work for everybody, but I've never noticed any discernible lag in terms of input, misshifts or anything like that with any of the Cube wireless style wheels. But the USB connection works absolutely fine as well. So regardless of how you connect it, you've got two options here. You can run either through Bluetooth or through this CubeSet software. Now the CubeSet software is relatively primitive and limited in its functionality, but it gives you the core features that you need to get things up and running and get your lights configured how you like them. For those people that don't want to dig in deeper and do all the interactive stuff in SimHub. So you've got a page here for your inputs. One thing I will mention here is that it is a separate software package between their pedals and their wheels. It would be nice to see them integrate everything into the one software package at some point. So yeah, they do have quite a bit of work here to go in terms of refining this software, I think, and adding a few more features. But input tab here, you can see all the various different inputs on the wheel represented. I can't get over how nice these buttons feel. They really do feel absolutely fantastic. We've got an adjustment here as well for our encoder pulse width. Now you'll notice that these do only operate as rotary encoders, not as multi-position switches. So if that is a functionality that's important to you, that is one thing that you're not going to get on this wheel. But this encoder pulse width adjustment allows us to adjust how long it pulses for in either direction when we click the button. So for some sim racing titles, they're a little bit more sensitive. So if you turn it one click, you might find that you get two movements inside the game, or vice versa. You might find that you have to move it a couple of times to actually get it to register inside the game. So adjusting the encoder pulse width can allow you to fine tune and dial that in. You can't adjust it per button, only as a global setting here. Likewise with the RGB lighting as well. One thing that I complained about a year and a half ago now when we reviewed the F Pro, I think it was, and still is the issue here now, is that there isn't a global setting here to adjust the brightness on every single LED on the wheel. You can see if we click on the right-hand side here, we can choose between colors for the entire wheel. We can also click on an individual button and set a color and a brightness here on the right-hand side, but we don't have the option to just set a global brightness here, which is one thing that I think is pretty obvious and missing on the wheel, but you can do all of that stuff inside SimHub anyway. So again, if you just want to get things up and running at the most basic elementary level, then CubeSet has got you covered, but SimHub is really where I think the majority of people are going to be spending most of their time really dialing this in. So with paddles, we've got a calibration for both our paddles. So all we do is we click on calibrate, hold the shifter in, click calibrate, and then let go, and that's going to calibrate our activation point. You can see now when I go across to the main screen, we can see that registered, and then under device we've just got the ability to clear or flash a firmware update to the wheel, and then under about it's purely just a little bit of information about the firmware version and the version of the software that we're running. So again, very basic software, but it does what it needs to do at least, and I'm glad that they do have this available so that you're not absolutely forced to use SimHub, although again, most people are going to want to use SimHub, but it's worth the donation. It is donationware. You don't have to pay for it, but I would definitely recommend paying for it just to support the creator. And it really is an absolutely fantastic piece of software. So let's close off CubeSet now and jump into SimHub quickly. All right, so SimHub loaded up now. I'm not going to make this a full tutorial on how to use SimHub. There's plenty of videos available for that, but just to give you a super quick rundown on the core functionality here, SimHub has come a long way in the last 18 months or so in terms of integrating baseline profiles for a lot of popular wheels. So when you open up, rather than having to go in and configure Arduino boards and all that complex stuff, all you're going to need to do is click on add new device, and you should find the wheel in this list here. I'm not going to scroll down because this is a beta version and you might see a couple of wheels that haven't been announced yet, and that would get me in trouble. So I'm not going to do that, but you'll find the wheel in the list here. You just click on it, click on OK, and that will add it in a profile with default settings like what you see here. You'll also notice that all the lights have configured themselves based on that profile. Now, because this is an unreleased wheel at this point in time, there isn't a lot of community support in terms of profiles that are available just off the shelf, but look, SimHub has come such a long way recently. There's such a massive level of community support with some extremely talented profile creators out there. I'm sure it'll be no time before we see some of the profiles existing for other wheels adapted across to suit this one. So if you're not the sort of person that wants to go in and tweak things yourself, I'm confident that within a couple of months of this wheel being released, that there'll be plenty of profiles available. Now, one thing that I did notice with the LED lighting here, just with the default profile, and you can see I have dropped the brightness down a little bit there, but if we go up to 100% brightness, you can see the red LEDs are still a little bit kind of more pinky, orangey color to my colorblind eyes at least. They don't have that vivid red color that you might be used to seeing in some other wheels. If we dim that down to say 50%, you can see it gets even more pronounced. So that's very kind of pinky, orangey kind of color to my eyes, not a vivid red. like all the other red bits that you can see on the wheel. So just one thing to be aware of there, one little observation. Not necessarily a problem by any means, but you've got independent control of every single LED pretty much on the entire wheel. We've got it separated between our RGB LEDs and our button lighting. And then we've got separate profiles which we can load for either of these. So if we go into edit profile, for example, and I'll just drag this guy across quickly, what we can see here is we can add in various different effects based on all kinds of parameters here. You can see flag LEDs, RPMs, delta, fuel level, turbo, you know, sky's the limit basically. There's a ton of stuff here. And if it's something that you want that isn't here, as long as there's telemetry coming in from the game that SimHub can intercept, you can create your own stuff to, you know, make the wheel basically respond however you want to any telemetry as desired. So in the case of this, what we could do is we could have any one of the buttons respond as a rev counter, for example, as, you know, a indicator for what gear you're in, even if you wanted to. We've got flag LEDs, which you can use as a spotter, or, you know, just to indicate what the track status is. So green flag, red flag, for example. You can have the lights on the wheel set up as a spotter too. So say, for example, you've got a car on your left, the left-hand side of the wheel would flash whatever color you wanted it to. And yeah, basically whatever you can imagine you can do in SimHub as long as you've got the ability to do so. And there's plenty of tutorial videos out there. But just to give you a super quick example here, you can see right now I've got that lit up as if I were in pit lane, I think, under this profile. And then I can also set, so for example, if I was to hit the RPM rev limiter, you can see they're going to flash. And again, you can configure this however you want. So that's just to give you one example, but that's everything in terms of software. Let's jump in now and talk about what it's like to drive with. So what is the wheel like to drive with? Now, as I touched on earlier on in the video, I do find 320 millimeters to just be too large for me and my subjective preference for driving GT3, GT4 and Formula style cars. Again, it is the diameter that they have in the real life car that this is kind of, you know, designed from. So, you know, it is a very subjective thing, and it almost feels like a silly argument making that, given that it is the diameter that they use in the real car. But for me, being used to using a smaller wheel, I do just find it a little bit clumsy to drive with. I find it just makes the input to the car feel a little bit vague in some circumstances compared to with a smaller diameter. But I mean, look, you do adjust to it over time. After, you know, 2 or 3 hours of driving with the wheel, I did find that I adapted to it, and then going over to a smaller wheel felt weird for a couple of minutes while I kind of adapted back to that again as well. So look, I think if you really like the design of the wheel, you'll probably find that it won't bother you over time, but you do just need to be aware of those things that we discussed earlier in terms of the impact that diameter has on the force feedback, particularly if you're driving on a weaker wheelbase, so something say under about 10, 15 Newton meters of torque. That's really where I think it needs to be more of a consideration, whereas anything over that, you're probably going to adapt to just fine, and you'll be able to crank up your force feedback a little bit to account for it anyway. So definitely something that you need to consider though. There are a couple of knock-on effects from that as well in the driving experience. So you'll notice in the driving footage, it is a little bit more difficult to reach some of the buttons with your thumbs than it would be on a smaller diameter wheel. So you can see here, the top 2 buttons are absolutely fine. I don't have the biggest hands in the world. I wear large size gloves. The thumb encoders are okay because they are a little bit further away. They are a little bit more difficult because of that stiffness that we talked about earlier. If you compare with the F Pro, for example, you can see that's an easier reach, which just gives you a little bit more, you feel a little bit more in control, I would say, with my hand size, at least with this wheel, than you do on the larger diameter. The other thing you'll notice here as well is that on this wheel, I can reach these bottom buttons without having to rotate my hand around quite as much as I have to with the AMG wheel. So by comparison, if we hold this wheel, you can see I don't have any chance of touching those buttons without rolling my hand around to do so. Now, most people will be mapping functions down here that you're not really wanting to use quite regularly, but if you are wanting to map functions there that you don't want to have to adjust your hand position, so say something that you want to be able to adjust mid-corner, then you will have to adjust your hand position for most people to reach those buttons. So that is a consideration as well. Weight and balance of the wheel, absolutely fine, no complaints whatsoever. The buttons, as I said before, have an absolutely fantastic feel to them. So those push buttons really, really do stand out as something that really does surprise me how good they are at the price point of this wheel. And look, beyond that, the shifters have a perfectly okay feel to them, other than the stickiness that we experienced that I described before with the downshift. I did notice that difference between the two just in the resistance too, so I'm not sure whether that's something that's intentional or not, but we'll find that out once you guys start getting your hands on these wheels. But look, in terms of rigidity, strength, and all those things, absolutely no complaints at all. Didn't run into any issues at all with Bluetooth dropping out, although of course your experience may vary on that depending on the design of your particular system. We've never had any issues with any of the Bluetooth wheels that we've tested here, so I didn't expect to run into any problems with this guy either. And look, all in all, I think it does a really good job of what it's setting out to achieve at a relatively good price point as well. I'm happy with the quality that we're getting here overall for the price point, particularly when you compare it to a lot of other wheels that are on the market. Would really love it to have those, at least the option of some clutch paddles if you wanted to spend the extra to add them. As I mentioned earlier, even the F Core, which does come in considerably cheaper than this wheel at a baseline, does have the option to add analog paddles if you want. And I think that that will be a deal breaker for a lot of people, as will be the fact that, you know, it is a Mercedes-AMG branded wheel. So, you know, unless you're driving a lot of AMG cars in your sims, you're probably going to ultimately end up looking elsewhere anyway. So I would really love to see a generic version of this wheel. I think it's more of a branding exercise than, you know, something that adds to the desirability of the product overall. Again, I'm not necessarily a Mercedes guy though. That may be something that you absolutely love about the wheel though. So again, that's just my own personal preference. I prefer a more generic wheel, but you know, that's completely up to you and what you want out of a sim racing wheel. But other than that, look, I think it does all the things that it needs to do. I'm, you know, actually quite surprised at how cheap it is for the level of quality that we have here. So at the end of the day, I really see no reason not to recommend this. If it suits all the things that you want, if it ticks all of your particular boxes, then yeah, there's no red flags here at all, other than just the issue that we had with that downshift, which I'm confident won't be an issue by the time you guys get your hands on these wheels. But obviously we'll let you know in the comments, and you guys can let us know in the comments as well if we do see any longer term issues with that. But yeah, otherwise it's a thumbs up from me. I think it's a really great wheel. In particular, those buttons just really do stand out as absolutely fantastic, particularly at this price point. And I think it's as simple as that. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If the video has helped you out, please do leave a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel as well if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on future reviews like this one. And as we said before, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that we've talked about in today's video, there are some links down in the description below. Those are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you, and we really do appreciate your support there if you find what we do here of benefit and value to you. So thank you very much for that. But above all, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again very soon. Bye.